Hey guys, this is Khavrion here with another battle report. This is for IGL Season 7, Round 3. Me as Steel Phalanx versus QueensGambit as Hassassins Bahram in a game of Acquisition. To give it away at the beginning, I did win this game, but both my opponent and I made some pretty serious mistakes on our first active turn. And the way that we responded and followed up to those mistakes in our gameplay is where I think the game was decided. To me, I think that's really interesting and makes for a good battle report. I often like to summarize getting good at infiNity as making fewer mistakes than your opponent and exploiting your opponent's mistakes better than they exploit yours. So being able to recognize a mistake and not double down on it and instead make it harder for your opponent to exploit that mistake is a very good skill to have if you're trying to get good at infiNity. QueensGambit and I are both pretty darn experienced infiNity players. And so while we do both make mistakes, we also, I think, have some experience in realizing those mistakes and then backing off from them into the safest position we can get. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. The mission is Acquisition. This is one of the oldest or maybe most popular missions. It feels like it's been around forever, and it feels like it's been in many of the tournaments that I've ever been to. For all that, Acquisition is also the poster child for the degenerate, go second, not interact, and win by default strategy. All the scoring happens at the end of the game, and all the scoring is associated with either having button pushed at the end of the game or being in control of things in the midfield at the end of the game. Consequently, if you're going first, you really need to make sure that you've done a lot of damage to your opponent, because if they have basically anything left standing, they will clear out what you left there and then take all the points away from you. Now, it used to be that people would run hidden deployment specialists in this mission all the time, and these hidden deployment specialists would, at the very end of the game, appear from hidden deployment and then steal things, and it was truly not interactive. I haven't actually seen or heard of that happening since N3, so maybe the meta has shifted so that strategy is no longer viable. But the scoring of Acquisition itself hasn't changed much. And the fact that a non-interactive strategy like that used to be viable says something about how Acquisition itself is today. Anyway, let's basically get into it. Across the center of the board, there are 2 communication antennas in yellow and 1 tech coffin. The communications antennas are buttons that you have to push. You get 2 points per antenna if you have activated it. And then all 3 of these are things that you have to control at the end of the game by being the only person with models in contact with them. I think contact with the antennas is worth 1 point, and contact with the tech coffin is worth 3. On top of that, you have 1 classified. And right off the bat, all of this pretty heavily favors going second. If you get the last turn of the game, you can push buttons to deny them to your opponent, you can move models into silhouette contact to deny the control to the opponent, and of course, if your opponent wants to stop this, they have to move all their troopers into the midfield, which is order intensive and tends to be pretty much cannon fodder for any good shooters that you do have. Thus, if you're going first, you absolutely have to focus on killing your opponent as best as you possibly can. And to that end, the only small boon that you get if you're going first is that you get 16-inch deployment zones. That is nice. It means that your shooters can start that much closer to your opponent. But in the specific context of Steel Phalanx versus Hassassins, it actually makes me feel even better about having to defend as Steel Phalanx. Firstly, I'll just have more room in which to deploy my guys. And secondly, because impersonators have to deploy outside of the deployment zone, if my opponent brings any fides, those fides will have to be just a little bit further back. Now, no fides will be making an appearance in this game, but the point is that the 16-inch deployment zone can be a benefit to the defender as well as to the attacker. There are a handful of extras. Everyone gets a free Bashi Bazooka. Engineers and hackers get extra dice and bonuses when trying to push buttons. And anyone with terrain 0G or terrain total gets the super jump skill, which I guess is kind of interesting. But these extras are small potatoes, and in my opinion, they don't really change the fundamental nature of the mission. That being, if you're going first, spend all your time annihilating your opponent, and if you're going second, spend all your time not being annihilated. Next up, lists. I am once again running the perhaps incorrectly named Why Not Have a GML Bot in Group 2. I chose this list based entirely on my opposition being Hassassins. In my experience playing original big boys, I have found that the least fun thing in the world is for a faction with easy pitcher access to park a pitcher next to Hector, isolate him, then start spotlighting the rest of the team and wiping them out. If that happens, not only have I lost Hector and his Strategos level 2, not only am I in loss of Lieutenant, I then also am at risk of having guys, most notably Phoenix, taken out by guided missile strikes. In this other list, I'm still at risk of losing Phoenix to guided missile strikes, but it is unlikely that I will have the disappointing combination of loss of Lieutenant and loss of Phoenix, and no troopers in Group 2 in order to fill in the casualties from Group 1. To talk briefly about this list, it is essentially a 2 Enomotarchos Big Boy inspired list. The first Enomotarchos is the Big Boy Enomotarchos with Akmon swapped out for a Myrmidon. You have Ajax, Phoenix, and Machaon. They're all fantastic. And while Akmon is in the list, he is not in the first Enomotarchos because I want to be able to give Phoenix Purity in ARO. I love this team. The combination of mimetism and smoke and lots of wounds on guys like Machaon, Phoenix, and Ajax, and of course lots of armor on Ajax, means that there really is not a lot of armies that can put the hurt on this team as a whole. Hassassins does have a handful of troopers that can generally injure specific members of this group. Someone like Yara is going to be able to cancel Phoenix's mimetism and probably force him to back down. Someone like the Asawira is probably going to be able to wound Ajax and force him to back down. But really, you're mostly just going to be putting wounds on people and forcing them to back off without really being able to snap the spine of the team and kill everyone and make them scared. The team is just super tough, and that's great. The team that I pair this with is Akmon, Oideros, a Myrmidon officer, and Pandora. Akmon is a 2-wound tack-aware engineer. Not much needs to be said about him. Oideros is kind of like a hero version of a Myrmidon Spitfire. He has a Mark 12 instead of the Spitfire. He's got Eclipse grenades, and he has 2 structure. That structure is kind of quirky, and it does synergize with Akmon a little bit, but it's kind of annoying too because he doesn't have remote presence, which means you can't re-roll in order to heal him. Thus, I pretty much won't be using Akmon to bring Oideros back unless Oideros is truly unconscious. Other things that are useful about Oideros in general are that he is a specialist, he has number 2, and he has NCO. NCO actually means that if I lead with this team that has Akmon in it, I can potentially attack with 12 orders, and that's kind of interesting. The next member of the team is the Myrmidon officer. I don't tend to find this guy particularly interesting. He costs a lot, and he isn't all that good at anything in particular. Like, he's got martial arts and all that stuff, but he's only got an APCCW. He's got mimetism and eclipse grenades, but he is shock vulnerable, which means I don't really want to leave him on ARO. And while his boarding shotgun I have actually found to be somewhat useful in this team, specifically if I'm running around the corner with this team, I will often have the Myrmidon officer being the point man rather than Oideros, because the Myrmidon officer can threaten 3 templates or threaten 3 shots at +6. The fact is that a burst 3 BS-12 boarding shotgun, even with NWI and mimetism -6, is not that great when you're paying 34 points. Still, he's there as chain of command, so if Machaon gets missile struck, I'm not in loss of lieutenant, and in that role, he does his job. The last member of the team is Pandora. As I've mentioned before, I think Pandora is the most interesting addition to Steel Phalanx to come out of Black Wind. She is essentially a wildcard version of the Myris, which means that she is a Whip 14 hacker with NWI, with 0 pain, with a pitcher, and because she's a wildcard, she now has the ability to join links. In my head, you are going to use Pandora to walk up the field and throw pitchers and then spotlight or hack people as you move the rest of the team around. In practice, that hasn't really been what's happening. For reasons that I can't quite put my finger on, I just haven't actually been throwing pitchers and then move hacking as much as I thought I was going to be. But it is still nice that she takes all the Lamids and the Probats and then her own pitchers if she throws them out and gives them the teeth of Oblivion or Spotlight or what have you. For 24 points and 1 wound NWI, I think that really is enough. Other than that, in the list, we have 3 Flash Pulses, 2 of which are on Lamids and 1 are on a War Core. These guys are all fantastic. You have the Probot. I chose the Probot instead of a Net Rod because I wanted to allow Pandora to refill her pitchers. What that cost me is Pandora's Medikit. I'm not sure if that's necessarily a worthwhile exchange, but it's one that I've made and I think I will keep making it. And last, we have the Samick Missile Launcher. Obviously, the idea here is that Pandora can run around and spotlight people as the team is moving around, but as I mentioned earlier, that hasn't really been happening as much as I thought it was going to happen, and I think it is worth thinking a little bit about why that's the case, but I'm not sure this is the battle report for that. The only other thing in my list which is relevant is the Corsair Bashi Bazook. In this mission, we get a free Bashi Bazook, and I have chosen what I think is the best one, which is the one that comes with EM mines. This is kind of like the free motorized bounty hunter that people got in previous missions. He basically goes into a group and he, has marker state and he generates his irregular order, and he effectively allows you to have 11 orders in group 1, provided you're willing to spend a command token. I actually like the Bashi Bazook's inclusion a lot more than the motorized bounty hunter because I think Bashi Bazooks are much more interesting. Bashi Bazooks have Holo Projector, and Holo Projector lets you masquerade as being something else in your list, and it also lets you have copies of them. So what I end up doing with the Bashi Bazook is masquerading as being 3 conventional Myrmidons, and I don't have to reveal which of these 3 are the Holo Projectors until after I put my fire team markers down. Even after my order count phase and fire teams and all that stuff, my opponent doesn't necessarily know which of the 3 Bashi Bazook Myrmidon impersonator guys is the real one, so there's still some mind games I can play with that deployment. In essence, Holo Projector is fun. The problem is, it's not actually all that good. Like, it's hard to imagine why I would spend some of my precious actual slots on a 15-point Bashi Bazook just so that I can have a masquerade of, I don't know, Myrmidons or something like that. And for this reason, I just don't take them all that often myself when I have access to them. Not that I have access to them in Steel Phalanx, and I also don't see other people taking them all that often. So they're really fun, but they're not really good, and because they're not good, people don't take them, which means that you don't get to play with them all that often. It's therefore kind of cute and nice that Corvus Belli is giving us this guy for free. And in a mission like Acquisition, I think he is both useful on the attack and useful on the defense, and that also makes him interesting. Suffice to say, I like the inclusion of the Bashi Bazook a lot more than I like the inclusion of the Motorized Bounty Hunter. And while I'm still not sure that actually including these guys in general is good for competitive infinity, like getting an extra order in your main group to go kill stuff is just going to make Alpha Strikes all that much better. If we are going to include guys for free, I think this guy is much more fun to include than the Motorized Bounty Hunter. At least, those are my thoughts. Next up, my opponent's list. My understanding is that my opponent, QueensGambit, switched from Vanilla Hack-Islam to Hassassins after the rework. I've played against his Vanilla Hack-Islam fairly regularly, our weeknight availabilities and time zones line up, and QueensGambit seems to have a pretty good sense of what is the meta. Thus, it is interesting to note that of all the new profiles that got added, like the Bakhtar and the Sondokbot, the only new thing that he actually took that was added to Hassassins is McMurrah. Now, McMurrah is, of course, fantastic. He was pretty much auto-include in N3 for anyone that could take him, and while N4 shook things up a bit, it is no surprise to see the guy at all. But what is more remarkable is that he is the only new thing that got taken. Other than him, everything else is pretty standard pre-rework Hassassins, in my opinion. And what that is a solid mix of medium-range firepower backed up by Barrads with pitchers to handle long-range problems, and of course the Hassassin trademark Aero active defense. The first fire team is pretty standard. It is an Asawira AP Spitfire, a Ghulam Doctor, and a Barrad Killer Hacker. The Asawira is of course fantastic. The Bareed Killer Hacker can shoot Burst 2 pitchers on BS-12, and given that you have a Hacker and a Killer Hacker in your list, it makes sense to put the Killer Hacker with your heavy infantry. The only mild anti-symmetry is that the Ghulam Doctor is paired with the Asawira. The Asawira is going to be taking the wounds, but because he has regeneration, it's not likely that the Ghulam Doctor is going to get as much work done. Still, the Ghulam Doctor is really good, so I'm not really complaining, just sort of noting a mild anti-symmetry. Next up is, I think this is a core rather than a Harris, but it's a 3-man core, so it's still essentially the same. You have a Ghulam NCO with Smoke Grenade Launcher, you have a Bareed Hacker, and you have Yara Haddad with MSV2, Strategic Deployment, and an AP Marksman Rifle. Yara Haddad is, of course, the star of the show here. Her MSV2 and AP Marksman Rifle in BS-13 are going to get a lot of work done. The combo of the Ghulam and Yara is actually part of what made Hassassins so mind-numbingly good at the start of N4. They could do this thing where they threw smoke on something, and then Yara walks up, provokes a dodge through the smoke, and then shoots things. And it was the FAQs that tried to prevent this abuse of the dodge provoking that led us to have speculative BS attacks and all the other stuff that fell from that. Yara wasn't the only person that did it, but it was definitely a major strength that Hassassins had at the start of N4, which the FAQ has removed. And even though that's obviously nowhere near as literally busted good as it was at the start of N4, having both MSV and Smoke in the same link is relatively unprecedented. Thus, no complaints about this link either. The only thing I will say is that while Yara Haddad is really solid on paper against Steel Phalanx, she is not a silver bullet that is going to cripple me. She's only BS 13, she's only burst 4, and the AP Marksman Rifle is only damage 13. Thus, while she might be able to force Phoenix to back down, she is not super likely to kill him in one order. On the other hand, because he has Sixth Sense, he doesn't care about the smoke, giving him a -6, and his heavy rocket launcher, if it wins the face-to-face, could well burn Yara straight to dead, and that will be the end of her. So Yara is threatening, but she's not a silver bullet. Next up is McMurrah. I don't need to say too much about him except that he's really, really good. I'll only remark that, like pretty much all warbands, Steel Phalanx tends to be pretty robust against McMurrah because of all the ubiquitous CC and dodging that Steel Phalanx has. I can't reliably beat him in CC, but I can make it rather inefficient for him to kill stuff. After that, it is the Rafik FTO Red Fury. This is an FO sensor bot with a Red Fury. That dude is pretty commonly seen in vanilla, where he pairs in a duo with the Asawira, but in ITS 14, I think he's basically an auto-include. ITS 14 gives this guy marksmanship and tactical awareness, which, given that he already has a Red Fury and is a specialist, turns this guy from really good into absolute auto-include. Seriously, the way that this guy benefits from that change is so much more than the way that everybody else's average sensor bots benefit from that change. It is no surprise to see this guy in the context of the ITS 14 things that they give to sensor bots. It's just a little bit of a shame that this guy gets such a big advantage, whereas everybody else kind of doesn't get as much of one. After that, we have the Shaitanya missile launcher bot. That'll pair with the Bear Reeds for, guided missile strikes, and the Ghulam Lieutenant. The Ghulam Lieutenant provides an extra command token, which gives him away as an obvious lieutenant, but the Farzan chain of command in the second group is going to keep him safe. The Ghulam basically sat in the deployment zone the whole game, which is a little bit odd. He could have probably joined a Fireteam Core, but sitting around doesn't really matter all that much, and joining a Fireteam Core wouldn't matter all that much either, so no real complaints there. All that's left are the ARO pieces that Hassassins brings. You have the Nadir, which is basically a budget Noctifer, forward deployment 4 inches, mimetism -6, hidden deployment Flamme Spear, obviously fantastic. 2 Daylamis, these are 8-point infiltrating camo dudes with Panzerfausts, again, really, really solid. And the last piece is a Shihab TR bot. My opinion of TR bots has been steadily improving recently. In N3 and at the start of N4, I kind of thought that TR bots were the bar that every army needed to be able to clear. So everybody needed to be able to kill a TR bot with high reliability. And so if everyone can kill them with high reliability, then, what's the point of bringing one? As N4 has progressed, especially as I've been playing Steel Phalanx and Toha, and then in Vol's League's Valorheima, I've noticed that the combination of the high chance to crit thanks to Burst 4 and the low chance to actually get killed straight to dead thanks to remote presence makes these guys kind of really annoying. It is often rather risky and potentially order intensive to take them out, and if the opponent has an engineer, it's easy enough to bring them back. I wouldn't love having to bring them back if it were costing me Group 1 orders, but this guy is in Group 2, which isn't going to be doing all that much anyway. So my opinion in general about TR bots has been improving. Now in this particular list, there is no engineer, which means that if it gets knocked unconscious, it won't be able to get fixed. And while I don't actually knock the TR bot unconscious in this particular game, it's not hard to imagine against a different matchup like Combined Army with the Avatar, or Nomads with Salamandra or the Intruder, that the Shihab would just get knocked out right away and then not get fixed. I don't know that this list wants an engineer, but I'm also not sure that you want a TR bot if you don't have an engineer. All of which is to say, the TR bot is generally something that I'm thinking more favorably about. I'm not sure I would take one without an engineer, but in this particular game, it does end up being annoying, and it doesn't get knocked out, so the lack of engineer doesn't matter all that much. And yeah, that's pretty much the list. If memory serves, my opponent won the die roll and decided to go first. This is potentially a little surprising because acquisition does favor going second, so I might be wrong about who won the die roll. But I am not wrong about my opponent getting to go first and deploying first, and me getting to choose my deployment zone. My opponent's setup is as follows. On the right-hand flank, he has the Farzan chain of command in camouflage there. This is Yara's team. Notice that there's the 16-inch deployment zone plus the extra 4 inches from strategic deployment. And then I believe there is a Delami right here. Sweeping through the middle, we have the Rafik over here. He's going to be able to run up this way and maybe push a button. McMurrow was the withheld piece, but he got plopped down there. This is the Ghulam Lieutenant. This is the Shihab TR bot. This is the Asawira's team. So you've got the Buried Killer Hacker, the Asawira, and the Doctor. And this is the Missile Launcher bot. There's then a Daylami right here in this position. And the Nadir is present right here on this box, but obviously in hidden deployment. My opponent has chosen to use his Bashi Bazook in parachutist format, so it is not currently on the board. Ultimately, I think this deployment is fairly aggressive, which is exactly what you need to do if you're going first in acquisition. This team can advance along this flank and throw pitchers at whatever it needs to be thrown at. This team can advance along this flank and again throw pitchers if that's what needs to happen, and shoot things with the Asawira if that's what needs to happen. And then he's got a lot of defensive coverage through the TR bot, through the Daylamis, and of course through the Nadir, which is hidden. It is a little amusing that his traditional deployment zone, the normal 12-inch one, is almost entirely empty, but again, that's what's going to happen if you are going first in acquisition. On the other hand, here is my deployment. As you can see, I have almost entirely refused this flank. I've deployed very little there. My thinking is that that's where Yara is, and Yara is the threat that I am more worried about than the Asawira. The Asawira has a higher burst and marginally higher damage, but I can throw smoke in order to stop it, and if I successfully throw smoke, then, the attack is done. What I am worried about, though, is that his Buried Killer Hacker over here has a pitcher. So I'm worried about that guy coming around this corner and then being able to throw a pitcher either maybe here or something like that, and thus getting access to both of my teams, which, as you can see, are hidden over here. Thus, what I've done is I have very carefully stacked a fair bit of arrow on this corner. I have the Flash Pulse bot here that can see that corner. I've got the War Core here, which can see that corner. And then I deployed 3 Myrmidons, which are actually the Bashi Bazook. One is here, and I forget where the other one is. Maybe this one here is the other one. These are the Bashi Bazooks. This is the real Bashi Bazook, and so they are, of course, also watching that corner. I would like to be able to stun the Buried as he comes around the corner before he gets line of fire with that pitcher on someone like Phoenix, and I'm hoping that I can succeed. With that thinking in mind, let me just take you through the deployment. We have Pandora standing up. The idea is that if the dog comes jumping through and jumps on one of these buildings or something like that, she can hit him with the viral pistols and maybe kill him. We have Akmon, we have Oideros, and we have the last member of that team is the Myrmidon Chain of Command Officer, who is over there. In the other team, we have Ajax. Machaon is the Link leader. This is the Myrmidon, this is the real one, and then this is Phoenix. Phoenix was my withheld piece, and I put him down there so that I could watch both this corner and also watch the advance of the dog and the TR bot in case it decides to try anything. Other than that, I've got the War Core here, which we've already talked about. I've got a Probot here, Flash Pulse bot there, watching the corner, Flash Pulse bot here basically being a cheap cheerleader. All in all, I have essentially castled up in one corner, as I like to do, and I am taking advantage of the extra 4 inches of deployment in order to do that, to put the Bashi Bazook there, and then actually Oideros is also outside the deployment, and that's important because he is another person that I forgot to mention earlier who is watching that corner. All that done, let's go ahead and talk about the first turn. In this first turn, my opponent decides that he would like to try to use his guns to deal damage to my Steel Phalanx. In particular, he'd like to use the Asawira in order to do that. In my opinion, this is a mistake. What ends up happening is the Asawira basically runs up to this position and gets in a gunfight with first Oideros, then the Bashi Bazook, and then Phoenix. Throughout that process, he ends up spending a lot of orders, and I think all he does is kill the Bashi Bazook, and then maybe he has to take out the War Core and successfully takes that guy out. This takes maybe 4 or 5 orders, and at the end of it, he realizes that he has not really accomplished a heck of a lot of anything, and his prospects for continuing to do damage are relatively limited. As he and I discussed after the game, what he should have done instead is taken the Buried Killer Hacker, run around this corner, and then dropped a pitcher, say, right here. Or maybe right here. The idea is that you drop a pitcher there, and then you can spotlight Phoenix, kill Phoenix, and move on without having Phoenix there for the rest of the game. It's likely to take a lot of orders in order to pull that off, and you probably won't succeed at much else other than killing Phoenix and maybe one of his friends. But Phoenix is an absolutely oppressive ARO piece, and so having your entire first turn spent eliminating him is not necessarily a bad idea. Now, if I've done my job correctly, I am not going to give him all that many targets after Phoenix. I'm going to force him to put the pitcher down, forward or something like that. But just in case I was wrong and he can get the pitcher closer in, I have made sure that there is nobody in splash range. If you drop a missile on Pandora, for example, you're not going to be able to, hit Machaon, for example. Anyway, that's not what happens. What actually happens is he spends maybe 5 or 6 orders gunfighting people, and at the end of it, he has gotten smoke thrown down and put a War Core and a Bashi Bazook unconscious. At this juncture, he's not completely out of orders. And I think it would be really tempting to, look at the dice that have failed and say, okay, the next one is going to work. I've got to try that. But that is not what QueensGambit does. Instead, he looks at his position and says, okay, I've ran out of orders. I have failed to have a backbreaking first strike. Therefore, my job is to fall back into a defensive position. And while this picture is taken at the end of my first turn, it does sort of give a picture of what he did. He basically took his link and he hid back in this corner, moved the TR bot up in order to take some pot shots. I think he takes pot shots at Ajax and does a wound, and then takes this team and moves it over here to get better position to push a button. The other thing that he does is he does shoot the Bereed's pitchers, so there are pitchers hidden behind this building, which is going to be extra annoying for Ajax. I don't mean the pitchers on top of the building. Those are mine that I put down in my turn, but there are also pitchers behind the building, which will be relevant during my first turn. So the point is that my opponent made a mistake. Attacking with his gunfighting Asawira instead of throwing pitchers and guided missile striking was probably not the right call, but he recognized that mistake and chose to go back and be more defensive, and I think that retreating into a more defensive position is absolutely the right thing to do. Anyway, that brings things to my first turn. This picture is from deployment, but it is suitable enough to talk about what happens on the turn. My opponent is hunkered down with his Asawira and 2 other guys in this corner, and my order pool is entirely intact. What I would like to do is take my link. I want to use Ajax to CC the Asawira, so it's got to have Ajax. Take the link with Ajax, Machaon, Phoenix, and this Myrmidon, then run around to this position and basically deal damage to the Asawira and kill him. If I do that with enough orders left over, I can then sweep around and kill these 2 guys, then set up with Phoenix in a long-range defensive position watching, over this direction or something. To do that, I will have to go through this Daylami, I'll have to go through the TR bot, which moved up to here, and then I have to recall there is a pitcher over behind this building. In theory, with a combination of smoke and the purity of Discover, because I'm in a pure team, I should be able to handle the TR bot and the Daylami without too much orders. And I start that off by spending, I think, 2 orders walking over to this position, throwing down some smoke, and then drawing a bead on the Daylami. When it comes to things like Daylamis, my preferred tactic is to first short skill Discover, second short skill Move. If I do a Discover and then shoot and I fail the Discover, then my order is wasted. And if I do a Discover and my opponent reveals and shoots me, then of course I can just shoot the guy guaranteed. Discover plus Move gives me a high likelihood of being able to actually discover the guy, and then it also means that I still get some movement in case the Discover fails. All I have to do is make sure that after my movement is done, a new model still has line of fire on the Daylami, and the Daylami does not have line of fire on anyone else. I don't want to give any freebies, and if I fail, I do want someone else to be able to do the Discover plus Move again on the next turn. What ends up happening is Phoenix passes his Discover on the Daylami, and I decide to use Ajax in order to kill the guy. I'm a little worried that if I get crit, I don't want to actually lose someone like Machaon, and Ajax is the most likely to survive. The problem is, as I move Ajax up, he ends up getting to this position, which is within 8 inches of my opponent's repeater. This is a pretty fatal miscalculation. It's very, very close, but it means I either have to risk Ajax getting shot unopposed with a Panzerfaust, or I have to risk getting oblivioned. That miscalculation is itself the mistake. Neither of these 2 options are good. What I end up deciding is thinking, okay, the Bereeds only whip 14, he could fail. I am BTS 6, it'll be halved to BTS 3. I could pass that save. I'm guessing there's about a 50-50 chance that I don't get isolated, and if I kill the Daylami, then at least the Daylami's dead. Thus, I decide to shoot the Daylami. I do kill the Daylami, but unfortunately for me, Ajax ends up being isolated and the team is dissolved. I haven't spent all that many orders yet, but I'm in a really awkward position. Now, it would be tempting to reform the team with just Machaon and Phoenix and this Myrmidon, and then run around the corner and do my killing. The problem is, if I do that, I leave Ajax just sitting out here fully exposed, and I may not necessarily have the orders to go fix him with, say, Akmon. Moreover, I am concerned that there's a TR bot here that has some line of fire, and there is a Nadir somewhere that I haven't yet seen. I don't know that he's right there, watching exactly the route that I want to take. I do have plenty of orders, but I am concerned that if anything goes wrong, then I am going to be caught out of position even worse than before, and that could potentially be game losing. Remember, I'm going second, so all I have to do is survive till turn 3, and I've got a really good chance of winning the game. Thus, although it pains me to do so, I spend a huge amount of orders taking Akmon and the rest of his team, running around here in order to engineer Ajax. I then reform the team with Ajax and run everybody back into their original defensive positions. And that looks something like this. This is an EM mine from the Bashi Bazook. Notice that the Bashi Bazook is, dead. I do take the time to throw pitchers with Pandora. I put one there and one there. The idea is that I can Oblivion the Asawira if it tries to activate. And then my link is set up in this uncomfortable position. It's uncomfortable because of how close together everyone is, but I simply run out of orders by the time I get here. So I've got Phoenix on ARO. He is hopefully going to be able to do enough work. I've got a Myrmidon officer here, Oideros here, Akbon there, and Pandora there with the other link. And then the original link is Machaon. This is the Myrmidon, and then this is Ajax. So yeah, a really cramped position, and I basically have only killed a Daylami. I have not done that much damage at all. I did reveal the Nadir to right there. I forget why the Nadir was revealed. I think he had a pot shot on maybe just Phoenix or something like that. But my opponent's order pool is almost completely intact, and I am really bunched up. The only saving grace, and this really is a big saving grace, is that my opponent is out of pitchers with this Bareed. He has shot them into this corner, and he doesn't have a baggage bot to refresh. Thus, if he wants to guided missile strike me, he'll have to do it by taking this link, walking all the way across the board, throwing pitchers at me from all the way across the board, and then get started. And the problem with that is that Phoenix is on ARO, doing his best to make that route difficult. Here is another angle on that position. And as I look at this, I am reminded of why the Nadir revealed. I moved Phoenix up not as the link leader at some point in time, and the Nadir was able to shoot him as he moved into that position. I dodged with him, I think, and the Nadir was at net -3. No cover, yes, mimetism, but I was able to survive and dodge, and it was all fine. I don't think that's a bad reveal of the Nadir, but it also didn't end up hurting me, and so I think that's fine. Here's how things look at the start of my opponent's turn 2. His order pool, again, is pretty much entirely intact. I don't even have the opportunity to strip him of 2 orders. But the troopers that want to get work done are kind of on the wrong side of the map, and moreover, they are only 4/4. What I believe he is going to do is he is going to push the button and then move these guys over and then start throwing smoke in order to get close enough to Phoenix for Yara to start shooting, and then use Yara to start shooting and killing Phoenix. And to be perfectly honest, I think at this juncture, that may be his best strategy. I do have an awful lot of ARO guarding, I think, this building on this side. I do have a lot of line of fire going through the building here. And problematically for my opponent, he doesn't really have any good ways to lob pitchers close to this line here until he already gets into this position. And that's exactly what Phoenix is watching. So taking the opportunity to grab his team and move it through the middle here, this is an intermediate picture that I took. I do think it is sort of a good idea to try to gunfight Phoenix with Yara because he's got to take out Phoenix. Phoenix is so oppressive, and Yara is probably the right tool to do it at this juncture, I think. That is more or less what happens. It does take a lot of time. My opponent has to throw smoke here so that Yara can get close. He does not think that this and this are within 24 inches of each other. And then having done that, he does advance up. But remember, if you shoot me, I can shoot you at any point in your movement, even if there's smoke blocking it. And because Phoenix has a template, I could potentially shoot Yara and then splash some of his guys. So that movement itself is sort of time-consuming and awkward. He does stop to push a button here, which costs half an order, and I think that's probably a good idea. But all of this does add up to being a rather time-consuming amount of orders. Once he gets into position to shoot, it takes maybe 3 or 4 orders to actually kill Phoenix. At first, I think I'm getting lucky. I don't take any wounds for the first 2 orders. I think I actually win the face-to-face, but don't wound Yara, although I'm not completely certain on that. But at the last moment, Yara does either crit or have 2 hits or something like that, and Phoenix does go straight to dead. That's not a super likely outcome, and the fact that it happened after already spending so many orders avoiding Phoenix and then shooting him means that it's not even that unlucky for me. But it is a shame to lose Phoenix, and it is a win for my opponent that he finally managed to kill the darn guy. Even so, it does mean that he is very far exposed and forward. He doesn't even have the orders to move over here and push the button, and he doesn't have the orders to fall back. What does happen is McMurrough moves up into this position to be more defensive. I think this Daylami maybe moves forward. I don't remember. But ultimately, he is still in the midfield, and that is that. It is now my turn, and my order pool is still pretty much intact. I'm able to move a flashball spot from Group 2 into Group 1, which means that I've got everything that I need, and I plan to attack with the Oideros Akmon link, which again has even more orders. I'll have to spend some time throwing smoke to block this line of fire. He still has the TR bot and the Nadir, both of which are annoying. But it doesn't take that many orders to get into the midfield, and I do have an awful lot of orders. What I end up doing is taking the team and moving up into this position. I throw smoke to block a lot of lines of fire, but I am able to draw a line of fire onto McMurrough and onto the Ghulam. If memory serves, the Ghulam dies pretty quickly, but McMurrough is able to dodge forward and ends up being able to see with his chain rifle the whole of the link. That's a little scary, but pretty much everyone in the link has multiple wounds or 1 wound NWI, and so that's when I activate Pandora. Pandora looks McMurrah dead in the face and shoots him burst 4 viral pistols. He chain rifles back. Some people in the link take wounds, but McMurrah takes hits from all 4 viral pistols. One of them might even have been a crit, I don't remember, but he's got like a billion saves and he just dies. Haq Islam viral ammo doing exactly what it's supposed to against dog faces. McMurrah down, I sweep into this position. I think I take a couple more gunshots over here, but it doesn't go anywhere. One of the bots had moved up to this position, I think, and I do take it out. And then I end up with my link team over here in this defensive position. The only other thing that I do is as I move, I do finally get to do that move hack thing with Pandora, and I isolate his Asawira. Once I got to that defensive position, I do still have a handful of orders left, so I actually take Ajax and put him on top of this building. And thus, when my turn ends, things look like this. McMurrah is long gone. There is a Daylami that has been moved into this position. This Red Fury bot is unconscious. This Gulam is unconscious. And the lion's share of my opponent's threatening pieces have been rendered to positions that are not that threatening to me. The Asawira is unlinked and isolated. Yara has lost one of her link members. And both the dog and the Gulam NCO are dead or unconscious, which means there's no more opportunities for smoke. I don't think I've killed all that much stuff, but I am still in a very solid defensive position, and my opponent really needs to shatter my army or I'm just going to win this on turn 3, and at this point I'm not sure there's a way that he can do that. My opponent realizes that he really needs to push this button, but the problem is that Ajax is watching it. Moreover, as long as Ajax is standing there, there is no way for my opponent to maneuver his troopers to actually defend this middle thing or this side over there. Thus, he decides that what he needs to do is shoot everything he has at Ajax. And unfortunately for him, a lot of things don't go right. I think he starts off with the TR bot taking shots at Ajax. The TR bot had wounded Ajax earlier on. We lost the wound marker, but did remember it at the last second. But Ajax doesn't even take any wounds, so this fact doesn't really matter. Once the TR bot fails a couple of times, I think Yara stands up and tries to shoot. Yara has AP Marksman Rifle and MSV2, so she might be more likely to do wounding. That happens, she shoots a couple of times, and I think Yara actually gets crit and knocked unconscious. So Yara loses that as well. And then finally, I think he takes his Asawira, which starts off only as isolated and frenzied, and the frenzied Asawira runs around the corner, shoots at Ajax, and also a whole bunch of things happen. He gets shot, he gets isolated, he gets stunned. I think he basically gets every single negative state applied to him because of this EM mind. The only one that is missing is he did not get glued and he did not get sepsitorized. But it does mean that at the end of my opponent's turn, he has a severely injured Asawira over here that is pretty much crippled. Ajax is still standing there just fine, and he hasn't even really pushed this button. That's where things end. I think the only other thing that he does is he wants to take this Daylami and move it into silhouette contact with this. It's going to stay in marker state, but if I throw Smark on the thing, then the Daylami can reveal or something. Still, it's a mop-up at this point. My order pool remains pretty much entirely intact, and my opponent does not have the troopers to contest it. I take these guys over here, and using lots of smoke just to be careful, I run up to this position and use Pandora to push the button. I then take these guys and run over here to kill the Daylami, and having done all of that, I basically waste 4 or 5 orders trying to get the Myrmidon officer knocked unconscious. My classified is, I think again, my classified is rescue, and I need to get someone unconscious so I can rescue him. Now, my opponent knows what I'm trying to do, and so in principle, maybe he shouldn't be shooting me, but what I do is I shoot at this Bareed. It looks like this Bareed managed to push this button, and being in silhouette contact, it is actually worth a point for my opponent if the Bareed, manages to stay alive. So by shooting the Bareed, I force him to respond, and there's an awful lot of stuff shooting at the Myrmidon officer. I'm hoping that he takes a wound, I can voluntarily ignore NWI, and then I can rescue him. This doesn't end up working out. The Myrmidon officer is just, it turns out, really, really survivable. It's hard to hit someone with mimetism -6. And so nothing happens, and we waste a whole bunch of orders. But at this point, the game is pretty much over anyway, so, it doesn't really matter. And on that note, the game is over. As we've just seen, basically, starting from my turn 2 onward, the game was pretty much a mop-up. But I think the most interesting parts of this game happened on turn 1. My opponent opened with what I think we both consider a mistake, trying to shoot at guys like Odoros and Phoenix, and thereby spending a lot of orders not accomplishing much. However, he realizes this mistake and uses those orders to fall back into a defensive position, including throwing out pitchers which are going to stop Ajax. That decision turns out to be really wise because on my turn, I run the Link team out, I miscalculate, Ajax gets isolated, and I recover from that mistake by choosing to spend all my orders, getting Ajax, recovered, and then retreating back to my defensive position. At the start of my first turn, I thought I had won the game because of my opponent's mistakes, but because of my own mistakes, and my ability to recover from them, at the start of turn 2, things are looking pretty good for both of us. Both of us have made mistakes, and both of us have recovered from those mistakes, leaving fewer opportunities to exploit them as best we could. And I think that is really interesting. Now, my opponent's turn 2, he is still suffering from the fact that he didn't kill Phoenix. He doesn't have his Bareed's pitchers nearby, and the other one has to walk in order to get there. And so while my opponent's turn 2 doesn't go well for him, I don't think these are new mistakes. I just think it's how it goes out, given that he didn't kill Phoenix on turn 1. After that, it is pretty much a mop-up, but I hope the first part of this was interesting. It was certainly very interesting for me to play it out. But on that note, I think that pretty much sums up the battle report. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you around.